So thanks everyone for joining. Welcome to the Power of Flows May webinar focused on security based user journeys. So we're going to be talking today about Descope Flows and in particular how you keep authentication experiences secure. So first, a little bit about myself. I'm Alan. I'm an engineer on the developer relations team based in Palo Alto in the San Francisco area. I guess if you were following along with the previous sessions, maybe on the bot detection or one of the other webinars that we've done in the Power Flow series, you know that I like to update people, even if they don't care about what I'm reading at the moment. And currently it's, I just finished Richard Feynman's book, Surely You're Joking. So that was a good break from the feeling of reading encyclopedias that was reading the Emperor, mentioned a couple of webinars ago. Other than reading in my free time, off from work, it's rock climbing or watching the Premier League. So that's about me. So next slide. Generally today, we're going to cover, we covered who I am already. And then we'll go into Descope for a couple of minutes. We'll try to keep that part short. And then most of the time will be on the demo. So we're shooting for around 20 minutes for presenting these two things, demoing, intro, and then we'll do 10 minutes at the end for questions, but feel free to ask questions in the meantime as well. We're happy to take them and happy to chat after as well if you want. But in the demo, we're gonna cover two things. We're gonna start from a basic password flow, and then we're gonna go into adding threat intelligence checks during password registration and IP-based threat detection. And then after that, we're going to just look at a flow that does risk-based MFA with a trusted device. So we'll get into more of what that means in a couple slides when we start the actual demo. But first, just a couple minutes on Descope. So Descope is a customer identity and access management platform. You can kind of think of it as a Stripe for authentication. You can embed with just 7 to 10 lines of code the authentication experience for your applications. That's like the UI, that's the actual actions like sending OTP, or you can look at stuff here like biometrics or social login. All of this in your application, you just embed you install the Descope package, you embed a snippet, and then all of this is kind of rendered that you see here. This is known as the Descope flow. So there's a couple type of components here. You basically have user-facing screens where you can edit the actual UI. Think of it as like a Webflow or WordPress style editor. You can mess with styles. You can add different types of authentication methods. And then after you add those, then you can add actions. So that's kind of like what I was mentioning a second ago, where you have, you know, verifying OTP codes, you have, yeah, all these different actions that you can take after screens or conditions. And the third type of action that you can take in a journey is like a condition. So you can check like if a user, these are essentially just if statements in programming, if else statements. So you can be like, if a user has an email set, if a user has a phone set, then you can do certain step up or certain functionality. And the final component that's not shown here is a connector. So it's shown here. There's also error handling. So you can customize whether errors are handled automatically in the actual flow, or you can manually set a screen to show. And we're actually going to use that in our demo in a second, where we basically, if a user is using a password that has been breached before, we're going to manually handle the error and then go through a different screen to tell someone, please try a different password that hasn't appeared in a breach before. And we'll do that pretty quickly on the, at least that section on the order of seconds or maybe minutes, but hopefully seconds. So those are kind of the four types of, a couple different types of widgets in the flow editor. And one of the cool experiences that you can realize using flows is progressive profiling, which basically means not just doing authentication, but almost the onboarding experience of a user getting information about who they are. You know, you can add, like you see here, you can add company info, you can skip, you can add like more phone, you can add a username, whatever it is, you can drag and drop and add that into an actual flow. So that's one of the really cool features of Descope is implementing progressive profiling through a flow-based, no code, drag and drop manner. This is the fourth, sorry, a bit of allergies, but this is the fourth type of component that you can have in a flow. It mentioned screens, it mentioned conditions, it mentioned actions, and connectors are another one. So that's this orange icon here. These basically allow you to integrate third-party services into your flow. So you can see how reCAPTCHA, which is a security one that we won't be focusing on today, we'll be covering some other connectors, but this is an example of, yeah, in general, you can bring in third-party services like Twilio, like Segment, whether it's for product analytics or sending emails or whatever. This is a really easy system to just, in your flow, bring in these third parties, or we even have generic HTTP connectors. So you can hit like your own endpoints or other ones that aren't part of our existing system. So I think that's enough on Descope. If you have any questions on that, feel free to ask. But for now, we'll get into the actual demo. So now you know what connectors are generally. And the two that we're going to focus on in the demo today are the abuse IPDB, which is basically a connector that uses the abuse IPDB service to check if a malicious or the riskiness of an IP address. So let's see. So that's the first connector, and the second one is going to be the sorry, I had a message there. Yeah, the second is going to be this sorry, I'm this, like, I think my screen disconnected for a sec. Let me stop share for a sec, and then reconnect my monitor. Sorry, I might just not use the second monitor. It's being a bit fickle. Okay, now it's connected again, but we'll see. If it's still fickle, then we'll not use it anymore. But for now, yeah, the first part of the demo will be on the abuse IPDB connector, and the have I been pawned. The have I been pawned connector integrates with a service that generally checks if your email or password has been breached. We'll focus on the password aspect. And then in the second part, we're going to get into adaptive MFA. So the use case there is kind of being able to mark a device as trusted. So a user will go through a flow, an authentication flow, and then they'll hit a screen where it's like, do you trust this device? Maybe you've come across this before already. But if you do, then in the future, you won't have to do MFA. And if you don't, then you'll continue doing MFA. So this is to kind of, for devices that you trust more, to allow you to implement this feature. Okay, let's get into it. So we'll start with the password complete flow. So if you go into Descope, not familiar, you can basically create an account and then create a new project. And here we just have a default flow kind of that lets you, here, I'll run it real quick. But basically it's like a default password-based flow. So you can enter an email and you can enter a password. If you don't have an account, you can sign up. So what we're going to do really quick is we're going to get into, well, first we'll explain these are the screens and these are the actions for those two things. So the first thing we're going to do actually is we're we'd configured it already, but basically we're going to configure an IPDB connector. So what you can do is you can add a name for your connector, whatever you want, and then you go to the abuse IPDB service website, and then you can actually just create an account. It's free, and then you could create an API. And that's what I did beforehand. I prepped so I didn't have to show my API key there on during the webinar. But basically then you just put it here, and there's like a free tier that you can just start using. While we're here, also get the have I been pawned connector set up. So this one, you don't even have to include an API key. You basically just set up the connector, you create them, and then you can use them in the flow. And we'll talk about how to use that in a sec. But basically, for the abuse IPDB connector, you can just add the check. You select the connector you want to use, and then this is how you'll access the value returned by the connector. So we'll actually put this at the beginning of our flow. So what we're going to do is the use case is essentially certain IP addresses are known to be riskier than others. Maybe they're contributing some sort of DOS attack, or there's some sort of like malicious activity that they might be attempting. So what we'll do is abuse IPDB. We'll check the person running the entity running the authentication flow, check their IP address and see if it's a known risky IP or not. And then it returns, we'll actually use it, is risky IP. If it's true, it's false. And what we'll do is we'll actually use this connector, and the results maps to this abuse confidence score. So basically, if it'll return a value between 0 and 100 being most risky, 0 being the least risky. So we'll do maybe like 60. So if it's above that, then we'll consider it risky. If not, then we'll just continue with the normal flow. If it's risky, then we want to add a screen that says risky IP identified. So we'll just say, we'll say that in the actual screen. Oh, risky IP address identified. So then that user won't be able to authenticate, waste resources, or do anything. You can reformat the flow. Just to tell us that. But yeah, basically, like let's say, for instance, they were both going to this, so we can mimic the experience. Basically, what would happen is they would just see, like, they would attempt to access the flow, and they would see a risky IP address has been identified. And that's pretty straightforward implementation experience. You can, of course, include it wherever you want, maybe after the user hits sign in or sign up and enter some details. But that's the first example. The second is during sign up, what if you want users to, you want to check if the user signing up with a password has a password that has been in a breach before. So what you can do is add the have I been pawn connector. So that's just to show the site again. You can actually check out like passwords. So I'm going to try one. I'm going to use password one and see if that's been breached before. Turns out that's been breached more than 29,000 times. So we're going to use that and see if it works in a flow. So we have here sign up. So what we'll do is we'll actually connect it to have I been pawned. And then this is the manual error handling we were talking about a second ago. So password used has appeared in a data breach. You want to actually handle that. So what we can do is we can add a screen that says, please try a different password. Your current selection currently or has previously appeared in a breach. So if I could spell, that'd be fantastic. So then we have a button that says just go back. Right, and then go here. If it's fine, then we go here. Let's also name this breach password. Okay. So now we reformat, go back, should go here. Nope, that's wrong. Go back, should go here. Save. Now we can actually even run this flow for effect in our Explorer. So you can see kind of this is the experience where you can just embed the flow into any application with a couple lines. We'll go to sign up. We'll use our Descope. So if you have questions, you can leave here. I'll use our identified breached password, password1 exclamation mark. So hopefully none of y'all are using that. And then, so first we'll try like, there's some basic validation that occurs, but then we do this, it'll basically hit the connector and be like, oh, please try a different one. Your currently used password has appeared in a breach. You can, I mean, we saw that you can customize that experience. I'll use a different one that hopefully hasn't appeared in a breach. So, oh yeah, that's oh my gosh. Oh yeah, I need to go delete the user here. Hopefully in a moment we'll see an example of a successful sign-in. Yeah, there. Now you see if you had a breach password, you essentially don't get to authenticate. And if you have a password that's fine according to that service, then you successfully authenticate. And this we just demoed in the flow in the Descope Explorer. So that's generally, this is an example of the use case of checking for risky IP and then breached password. So now we'll move on to the second part, which is trusted device. So this one we just made the flow to begin with, and we'll just demo it in a sec in the same platform Explorer. But you can, I mean, you can see it even like we can see like you can just embed flows into services like this, where you can easily like modify the experience. Like let's say we don't want so it's tied together just by the project ID and the flow ID. So we'll just make that little change. But this flow, essentially what it's doing is it's a social login with SMS-based OTP. So you can see if someone enters a phone number, it'll go into sign up in with OTP, verify it, verify the code. And then if they do social, it'll just sign in with social. So the cool stuff, the interesting stuff happens after. It's all interesting, but this one maybe particularly so because we're focusing on security today. Basically, you check if the user signing in from a trusted device. Under the hood, this is like a cookie-based system. But if it's not a trusted device yet, you can conduct MFA here. Maybe you have the user, and originally, if they don't have MFA set up, they can add add an email. And then later when they authenticate, they'll do 2FA with that email. Here we just have a mock screen for it. And then after that, you can choose whether or not to trust this browser. And then you can mark it as trusted if you want. So we can actually just try out this this flow. Sign up in. Enter. Okay, so this is the flow that we're just looking at, right? I think you can map the UI to it, but basically I'll just sign in with Google. I had signed in with Google previously, so redirect it back. But here essentially is where you complete 2FA. This is the mock request we're talking about. If we don't trust, authentication completes. And then let's say we come back again. and you have to do 2FA. But the interesting experience is if you do trust this browser, what happens the next time? Now, when you authenticate, you just directly go in because this is a device that you trust, and you no longer have to do the same system. So that's a really easy way to add risk-based or kind of adaptive MFA to your application, simply with this trust your browser functionality. And this is all the basic components that we've used even in the previous flow, which is like these buttons that you can drag and drop into the UI, and then simple actions like mark devices trusted. So hopefully you found those interesting. That's about what we have for the demo portion, the Let's Descope section. I guess last up, before we get into the open questions, are these resources. So definitely, if you haven't already, sign up for a Descope account at descope.com/sign-up. You can try it out with the free forever tier that we have. And then this document is pretty cool in terms of it's like an overview of in your Descope project, how do you maintain best practices security wise, and how does Descope help you with security? So there's kind of like things like storing your tokens in cookies as opposed to local storage, personalizing email templates, custom claims. There's also performance implications for a lot of these tasks. I would definitely check that out as a resource. Also, there's a couple different things that we didn't really touch on. ReCAPTCHA, I guess we mentioned, but device fingerprinting, fraud prevention. There's a lot of different resources that Descope has, so feel free to check these out. But hope you enjoyed. For now, we'll see what questions we have. So looks like we have a couple. Is it possible for a hacker to intercept mission through the... I think Kevin is helping answer some of these in the comments. So I'll just start from the most recent ones. Yeah, so the session takeover thing, I think we're talking about like how to mitigate, I guess generally how to keep sessions secure. And I think one of the ways that Descope does that is after you authenticate, Descope returns tokens. And that's, I think, a pretty general system is returning a session and refresh jot so that you have like the benefit of the convenience of having an access token that you can just send with every request, and the safety of having a short-lived access token, session token, and then a longer-lived refresh token that you don't send in every request, but you use periodically to refresh the session token, so that even if the session token is compromised or intercepted through the network, then you can very quickly refresh that token, and it's only a limited amount of time, not the entire refresh like authenticated user period that the hacker has access to. Other ways, I think, like Kevin mentioned, is we rotate refresh tokens. We also automatically rotate our JWKs. So the keys, the public and private keys that we use to sign the JOTs, those are rotated daily and stored over the course of 12 days so that there's no disruption in usage, but it's still secure because we rotate those. So that gets into the next question of that kind of seems like a lot of these are session related. questions. So that I guess, yeah, on what time intervals can refresh happen. Yeah, it's fully customizable in your console. So I can let me share real quick. I can share my screen. Desktop 2. So that sort of stuff is configurable in the session management. So if you go into your console and then project, you can set refresh token and session token timeouts at whatever order you want. You can even do this at a tenant level. So if you create tenant here, you can customize kind of like session management per tenant. So refresh and session token timeout, which is I think pretty cool. This is also stuff that you can manage in the SDK itself. You can make refresh calls whenever you need and refresh the session or refresh token. So there's a lot of customizability outside of like you can use no code in our console, or you can use code in our actual SDKs. But I guess I'll just quickly answer these. So can you talk a little bit more about other, really have a minute or so, other Descope security related connectors? Yeah, so there's a lot of cool ones. So we talked about reCAPTCHA, which I think people are pretty familiar with. So you could return risk scores in that system as well to detect if a user is potentially likely to be a bot and perform certain actions, or MFA. We have traceable, we have telesign. Telesign lets you see if kind of like abuse IPTV for IP addresses. Telesign is for phone numbers. So you can see if like this phone number is like a risky one that's used in a lot of spam or something. Sumo logic. Yeah, those are kind of the big ones that we have. Another question that we see here: what other conditions are available security-wise in flows other than trusted device? So I think I'm still sharing screen here, hopefully. If not, I'm sure people will let me know. But basically, you can even do a basic, like, this is Descope native functionality, check if a bot is detected based on their activity. So this is out of the box. You can do a similar thing with reCAPTCHA, like we were talking about. You can check for impossible travel if users are logging in from different locations. But there's no way that you can get between those different locations quick enough. Then you can have a check for that. The risk score, you can see if the likelihood that a user is malicious or a bot. And then finally, the trusted device one that we used already. And there's some others as well. You can even use like IP address. You can check maybe if you think like because the IP address changed, there might be more factors of authentication that you'll push onto the user. But yeah, so these are some examples of other conditions you can do. We also have device fingerprinting, so checking if like a new device is used, but yeah. So those are done. Let's see. And then we'll just end on this question. Yeah, I think this question was similarly touched on. This one's asking about the limitations of the session and refresh token architecture, and I think it's true that the validity of the session token is not revocable by like immediately. So there is some time where a hacker, if they have access to a session token, is going to be able to impersonate the user or have access somehow. But that's the sort of setup is mitigated by the fact that you can decrease that session token lifetime with the refresh token setup. Also, you can do things like you can customize, like we were showing in the project settings, what that timeout should look like, as well as you could actually make sure that it's hard to intercept these tokens in the first place by, instead of using don't store tokens in local storage, use like cookies, and within cookies use secure HTTP only. Make sure that cookies can't be accessed straight from JavaScript. So those are just a couple examples of how you can mitigate these issues. But yeah, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. Join our Slack community, AuthTown, which you can find on our website. Sign up, and I think we'll wrap up for the day. Thanks so much for joining, and hope you all learned something.